"When I grow up, I'll be your husband," the vampire queen laughed. 20 years later, he returned as. The vampire queen sat atop her throne, carved from black stone and etched with silver runes that glimmered under the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Her eyes, dark as midnight, surveyed the empty hall with a mixture of boredom and longing. The court had grown silent, whispers of her power fading into the shadows. 20 years had passed since a small human boy had dared to call himself her future husband, a joke at the time, but one that lingered in the deepest corners of her mind. She had been amused back then. The boy had been nothing more than a child, with wide, fearless eyes and the audacity to laugh in her presence. "When I grow up, I'll be your husband," he had said, his words tumbling like a careless melody. She had laughed, dismissing it as childish nonsense, but somehow the sound of his promise had woven itself into the tapestry of her immortal life. Even now, she could remember the tiny hand that had brushed hers, innocent and bold. The years had changed the world around her, but the memory remained like a pulse beneath her chest. Kingdoms had risen and fallen, alliances had shifted like the tides, and still, the queen had reigned, unchallenged yet quietly lonely. Immortality was a gift, she told herself, but it was also a chain. She had power, wealth, and fear in equal measure, but there was a void in her heart no throne could fill. Outside the castle, the night was alive with whispers of wind and distant cries. A storm approached, not of rain, but of anticipation. Rumors had begun to circulate among the villagers and hunters. A human was coming, one who bore a mark long thought to be forgotten. The mark of the queen herself, an intricate sigil etched into the flesh, burned faintly in memory. The stories told of a man who had survived impossible trials, wandering the lands beyond mortal reach, only to return with a purpose unknown even to himself. The queen rose from her throne, her long cloak trailing like liquid shadow. She moved with the grace of centuries, every step precise, every motion a blend of elegance and danger. Her gaze drifted to the moon, which hung heavy and red, like a silent witness to what was about to unfold. A name whispered in her mind, carried on the wind and curling through her thoughts like smoke: the boy, the human, the one who had dared to promise her a future. And somehow, she knew that promise was not yet broken. Meanwhile, across the jagged hills that separated the mortal world from the queen's domain, a figure moved with the quiet confidence of a seasoned warrior. The man was taller than most, his shoulders broad, his body bearing the scars of countless battles. His eyes, a striking shade of amber, reflected a life shaped by hardship, endurance, and a relentless desire to uncover the truth. Every step he took carried the weight of the years he had survived, the memories of pain and triumph that had forged him into someone unrecognizable from the boy who had once laughed so boldly in a vampire court. He had heard stories, of course. Legends that whispered of a queen who ruled with beauty and terror, whose immortality was as much a prison as it was a crown. He had been warned that crossing her lands could mean death, that the darkness she commanded was not to be challenged. Yet he had come. Not for revenge, though the ember of anger lingered faintly in his heart. Not for conquest, though power had its appeal. He had come because something had called him back, something older than blood and steel. A promise, a memory, a pull that he could not explain. The first encounter was inevitable. As the man approached the gates of the vampire domain, the shadows themselves seemed to stir, bending and twisting as if to warn him. The queen, standing high atop the ramparts, saw him before anyone else. Her instincts flared, a mixture of caution and a curiosity she had not felt in decades. He was no child now, no small figure to be dismissed with amusement. He was a force, a storm in human form, and her heart, immortal, unyielding, and proud, could not deny the stirrings he ignited. She descended the staircase that spiraled like a coiling serpent, her movements both deliberate and mesmerizing. The guards at the gates stiffened, unsure if their queen intended to greet this human or to strike. Yet when she finally emerged, her presence commanded awe. He stopped, his gaze meeting hers, and in that instant the years melted away. The boy who had laughed so innocently had vanished, replaced by a man whose very being demanded recognition. "Do you remember me?" the queen asked, her voice like velvet shadow, soft but impossible to ignore. He studied her, a flicker of memory crossing his features before he masked it with a calm that was more a shield than composure. "I do," he said, his voice steady, carrying both reverence and something more dangerous, a hint of defiance. "And I remember what you laughed at 20 years ago." The queen's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "And yet here you stand," she murmured, as though the act of standing there was a defiance in itself. She stepped closer, each movement measured, an unspoken question in her eyes. Was he here as a threat or something else entirely, something long denied? For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind ceased, the night quieted, and even the storm on the horizon paused as if to witness this reunion. Neither spoke, for words seemed inadequate against the weight of time and memory pressing down upon them. She saw the way he tensed, the subtle clenching of his fists, and knew he carried more than just the years. He carried wounds invisible to the eye, scars that only a heart could recognize. "I came," he finally said, "because you have something I need to understand." "Something unfinished." The queen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And do you think you can face what that is?" she asked, her tone a mixture of challenge and invitation. "Do you know what it means to tread in my world among shadows that do not forgive?" He did not flinch. "I have walked through fire and darkness before. I am not afraid." A ripple of something she had not felt in centuries ran through her. Pride, curiosity, longing. She could not name it, only feel it like a spark threatening to ignite. "Very well," she said, her hand gesturing toward the great hall. "If you wish to understand, you must enter my domain. And once you do, there is no turning back." The man stepped forward into the realm of shadows, and the gates closed behind him with a sound that resonated like the tolling of a bell. He was no longer a visitor. He was a participant in the story that had begun 20 years ago, a story she had thought would remain a memory, a fleeting shadow in her immortal mind. As he walked through the grand hall, the queen watched him closely. The servants and guards moved silently, unsure whether to fear or revere this human who dared approach their ruler with such confidence. He observed the grandeur, the relics of centuries, and the quiet melancholy that lingered in every corner. He was not impressed by wealth or power. He was searching, always searching, for the truth hidden beneath the layers of history and curse. "You have changed," the queen said softly, stepping beside him. "But in some ways, you are still the boy who dared to make promises he could not understand." He looked at her, a shadow of a smile flickering across his face. "Perhaps," he said, "but now I understand that promises are never truly forgotten, even by immortals." She paused, the words striking a chord she had thought silent for eternity. The night pressed in around them, thick with anticipation. Outside, the first signs of the storm approached, lightning illuminating the distant mountains and wind whispering secrets of what was to come. "You will learn," she said, her voice lower now, carrying a weight that made him stop in his tracks, "that this world is not kind to humans, even the brave ones. And yet you have returned. That is either foolish or courageous." He met her gaze steadily. "Maybe both," he said, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of a man who had endured more than she could imagine, yet had returned not for vengeance, not for power, but for something more fragile, more dangerous: understanding. For the first time in decades, the queen felt a flicker of something she had long buried: hope and desire, though she would not admit it even to herself. The memory of the boy's laughter, the echo of a promise, now mingled with the present, threatening to unravel her carefully constructed world. The wind howled outside, the first raindrops tapping against the stained glass windows, and somewhere deep within the castle, an old, forgotten magic stirred. It recognized the presence of the human, remembered the words of the boy, and awakened with a hunger it had not felt in 20 years. The queen turned her gaze back to the man. "You have walked far," she said, "and yet the journey has only begun. If you wish to stay, if you wish to learn, you must understand that nothing in my world is simple. Trust is dangerous, power is dangerous, and love is the most dangerous of all." He nodded, though he felt the weight of her words pressing against his chest. "I am ready," he said, and something in the queen's chest stirred at the audacity of that declaration. In that moment, the castle seemed to hold its breath, the storm outside pausing as if waiting for the inevitable collision of past and present. Shadows deepened, candle flames flickered, and the air thickened with a magic that was ancient, dark, and alive. The queen felt it coil around them both, a force she could neither control nor resist. And somewhere in the quiet, her heart, immortal, unbroken, yet long dormant, beat again, responding to the presence of the boy she had once laughed at, now returned as a man who carried destiny, danger, and perhaps redemption. The storm broke suddenly, lightning flashing across the skies as the castle trembled under the wind. The man and the queen stood together, poised at the threshold of a story 20 years in the making, neither knowing what the night would bring, yet both sensing that nothing would ever be the same again. And so, the first thread of their fate was woven, a delicate yet unbreakable line connecting the laughter of a child to the trials of a man, and to the immortal heart of a vampire queen who had finally remembered what it was to feel. But as the rain poured harder and the shadows shifted in ways both natural and unnatural, a whisper traveled through the halls, a warning, a promise, and a secret yet to be revealed. Someone or something was watching, waiting, and their presence meant that the story was far from over. The queen's eyes met the human's one last time before the hall emptied around them. And in that silent glance both knew the night had only begun, the storm had passed, leaving the castle drenched in a quiet, trembling calm. Rainwater dripped from the Gothic spires, forming rivulets along the stone walls. Inside, the vampire queen walked through the halls with the human at her side, her cloak brushing the floor like a shadow in motion. She had agreed to let him stay, though a part of her warned that the path they were walking was fraught with danger. Not just from the outside world, but from the dark forces that lingered within the castle itself. The man, once the boy who had dared to declare his love, now moved with cautious curiosity. Every tapestry, every suit of armor, every ancient relic seemed alive with whispers. He felt eyes upon him even when no one was near. The air was thick with magic, subtle yet undeniable. He could sense the power radiating from the queen, a force that could destroy or protect, depending on its will. He understood why the villagers feared her. Even the smallest gesture could command obedience or fear. Yet he was not afraid. Not entirely. There was curiosity, yes, and caution, and a spark of fascination he could not name. It was as if part of him had always belonged here, in this dark and beautiful place, even though he had grown in the mortal world far away from shadows and curses. They entered a grand hall where candles burned in silver sconces, their light flickering across the high, vaulted ceiling. The queen paused, her eyes tracing the intricate carvings on the walls. "These halls have seen centuries," she said softly, "and yet they have not seen you." Not fully. He studied her then, taking in the elegance and authority that made her so formidable. "And yet," he said carefully, "I feel as if I have always been meant to see them, to see you." Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes remained guarded. "Bold words for a human," she said, though her voice lacked its usual edge. "You speak of destiny, yet you do not yet understand the chains you tread upon." The human nodded, though his mind was already racing with questions. He wanted to know everything, the history of the queen, the nature of her power, the curse that surrounded her lineage. But more than that, he wanted to know her. Not just as a queen, not just as a legend, but as the woman who had laughed at his childhood promise, who had unknowingly planted a seed that had grown across the years. "You are different from what I expected," he said finally. "I thought you would be colder, distant, unreachable." The queen's gaze softened, a hint of something long buried breaking through her armor. "Centuries teach one to hide what is fragile," she said. "Power requires it, survival requires it, and yet some things cannot be hidden forever." The air between them pulsed with a tension neither could fully name. It was not just curiosity or history or even memory. It was something older, something that had waited through decades for this moment. A thread of connection had survived the years, stronger than either of them had imagined, and now it stirred to life with every glance, every word, every careful step through the halls of the castle. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden chill, a whisper of movement in the shadows. Both instinctively tensed. The castle had always been alive, but this presence was different, watchful, patient, intelligent. It lingered in the corners of the room, unseen but deeply felt. "You feel it, don't you?" the queen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Yes, something is here, watching us." Her eyes narrowed. "Then it is time you learn the truth. This castle is not just a home. It is a sentinel, a guardian of forces far older than your world. And there are those who would see me and you destroyed." He stepped closer, drawn not just by the danger but by the intimacy of the warning. "Then let me stand with you," he said. "Whatever comes, I will not turn away." A faint smile, rare and fleeting, touched the queen's lips. "Brave words," she said. "But courage alone does not prepare one for the shadows that dwell in every corner here. Some are born of malice, others of sorrow, and some of curses that time itself has not unraveled." She led him deeper into the castle, down narrow corridors that seemed to twist and shift with each step. Shadows danced along the walls, not from candlelight but from some ancient magic that breathed within the stones themselves. The man felt a pull, a sense of being drawn towards something he could not yet name. It was familiar, and yet foreign, like a dream half remembered. Finally, they reached a chamber at the heart of the castle. The room was circular, with walls carved from black marble and etched with runes that glimmered faintly with silver light. At its center lay a pool of water, still as glass, reflecting the ceiling above. The queen gestured for him to look. "This pool," she said, "shows what is hidden, what is feared, and what is longed for. But it does not lie. It will reveal truths whether one is ready or not." He knelt beside the water, peering into its depths. Images rippled across the surface. His childhood, the laughter that had echoed in her court, the promise he had made without understanding its weight. Then came darker images, shadows of the boy he had been, moments of suffering and survival, the trials he had endured alone. And then, impossibly, the reflection of the queen herself, standing beside him, her expression both proud and sorrowful. "You see," she said, her voice soft, "the threads that bind us are older than either of us realize. They stretch across time, through pain and joy, through fear and longing, and now they have pulled you back to me." He turned to her, the intensity in his eyes matching the pull he felt in his heart. "I do not fully understand," he admitted, "but I know one thing: I am here. And I will not leave, not now, not ever." The queen studied him, torn between caution and something deeper. She could sense the power he had gained over the years, the resilience and courage that had carried him through the mortal world. Yet she also sensed the vulnerability he carried, the part of him that still remembered the boy he had been, the boy who had dared to speak of impossible promises. "Then you will need to learn," she said, "to walk in my world, to understand the dangers that wait in the shadows, to trust and to risk, because once the threads are woven there is no turning back, and love is the most dangerous of all." Before he could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from the far end of the castle. Shadows moved violently along the walls, and a chill swept through the chamber as if the air itself had become aware of an intruder. The queen's eyes narrowed, and her hand moved instinctively to a dagger hidden beneath her cloak. "They have come," she whispered. "Those who would see this kingdom fall, and with it, everything we have yet to discover." The man rose beside her, ready for whatever threat approached. The air crackled with energy, the pool at the center of the chamber rippling as if it sensed the danger. And in that moment, standing together against the unseen force, he realized the truth she had spoken. To walk in her world was to walk in shadows, and yet he would not retreat. The intruder revealed itself, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving with unnatural grace. Eyes glowed faintly from beneath a hood, and the very presence of the being sent a shiver through the room. The queen faced the shadow, her expression calm but deadly. "You should not have come here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries and the power of her line. "Leave now or face consequences you cannot imagine." The figure laughed, a sound that seemed to echo from every corner of the castle. "The queen and the human together," it said. "Fascinating. I have waited a long time for this meeting. The threads of fate have drawn us together, and yet so many things are still unresolved." The man stepped forward, unafraid, his hand brushing the hilt of a blade at his side. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" The shadow tilted its head, as if amused by his courage. "I am the keeper of truths you are not ready to face," it said, "and I have come to test you, to see if the bonds you think unbreakable can withstand the darkness that approaches." The queen's eyes darkened. "Then you will see," she said quietly. "That strength alone is not enough. Courage alone does not protect. Only understanding, only trust, can withstand the forces that seek to unravel us." The shadow laughed again, fading into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the chamber trembling with the echo of its presence. The man and the queen stood together, breathless, aware that this encounter was only the beginning. The threads of their fates were tightening, pulling them toward a future neither fully understood, yet both were unwilling to turn away from. The storm outside had returned, heavier now, rain lashing against the windows with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Lightning illuminated the chamber in brief, blinding flashes, revealing the determination in the queen's eyes and the resolve in the man's. Together they faced not just the shadow that had come, but the weight of history, the curse that lingered over her line, and the emotions that neither had dared to name. "Tonight," the queen said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos, "we begin. And whatever comes, we face it together. But know this, nothing in my world is as it seems. Every truth hides a danger. Every choice carries consequence. And the path ahead will test us in ways neither of us can yet imagine." He nodded, understanding more than she could know. "Then we will face it," he said, "side by side." The castle seemed to sigh around them, the shadows retreating slightly, as if acknowledging the bond forming between them. And yet somewhere in the depths something stirred, a presence older, darker, and far more patient than the intruder had been. It watched, it waited, and it knew that the real trial was yet to come. The night stretched on, long and heavy with anticipation. Outside the storm raged, but inside, the human and the vampire queen stood together, bound by threads of fate, memory, and a connection that had begun in laughter 20 years before. The first step of their journey had been taken. The next steps would demand courage, trust, and a willingness to face the darkness not just around them, but within themselves. And in the quiet that followed, as lightning illuminated the marble walls and the pool reflected their determined faces, a whisper traveled through the castle. "The shadows are watching, and they are hungry. The story has only begun." The castle shivered under the weight of the approaching storm, shadows crawling along the stone walls like living creatures. The vampire queen and the human stood at the heart of the fortress, in the same circular chamber where the pool had first revealed the threads of their fate. The air was thick with magic, ancient and restless, and both could feel the pulse of power that moved beneath the stones. The shadow that had appeared days before was no longer just a warning. It was a storm gathering strength, a force that threatened to unravel everything they had begun to build. The queen's instincts were sharp, her senses honed over centuries. She could feel it in her bones. The darkness was patient, intelligent, and cruel. But for the first time in her long life, she did not face it alone. The human stepped forward beside her, a calm resolve etched into his features. Battle scars ran along his arms and shoulders, but there was no fear in his eyes. He had faced the world and survived. He had faced death, despair, and cruelty, and yet here he stood. Together, they were stronger than either had been alone. "We cannot let it breach the heart of the castle," the queen said, her voice low but commanding. "If it succeeds, it will consume everything, my people, my home, and us." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "Then we fight," he said simply. "Whatever comes, I will not falter." The shadows stirred, coalescing into a figure taller than either of them, its form shifting like smoke. Eyes glowed like embers beneath its hood, and a voice, neither male nor female, resonated through the chamber. "You think you can face me together," it whispered. "You are fragile, tied by memories, bound by promises. All of it will break." The queen drew a silver dagger from beneath her cloak, the blade etched with runes that pulsed faintly with light. "Strength is not always measured in steel," she said. "Sometimes it is measured in courage, and sometimes in trust." The human stepped beside her, drawing his own weapon, a sword forged from iron touched by lightning, humming with latent power. He had trained, honed, and prepared, but the force before them was unlike anything he had encountered. Still, he did not waver. "We will trust each other," he said firmly, "and we will stand together." The shadow lunged, moving faster than thought, a wave of darkness crashing against the walls. The queen moved with inhuman grace, dodging and striking, her dagger cutting through the tendrils of darkness as if she were slicing through water. The human followed, his sword flashing in tandem with her movements, striking with precision, anticipation, and raw determination. Despite their skill, the shadow was relentless, shifting and flowing around their attacks, seeming to anticipate their every move. It whispered words meant to weaken them, to plant doubt and fear. "He will betray you," it hissed to the queen. "She will fall, and your bond is worthless." She froze for a fraction of a second, and the human caught the hesitation. "Do not listen," he said, his voice firm. "We know the truth. We choose this together." The queen's eyes met his, and in that glance a current of power passed between them. Centuries of loneliness, fear, and isolation melted against the bond they had nurtured over weeks of cautious trust. The shadow faltered, sensing something it could not understand. Unity, trust, and courage born not from immortality or mortal strength, but from a connection that transcended both. Drawing on the power that flowed through her veins, the queen chanted a spell in the old tongue, her voice echoing like a song of ancient light. The runes on the walls pulsed, the pool at the center of the chamber glowing with energy, and a barrier of silver light expanded outward, wrapping the chamber in protective brilliance. The shadow hissed and recoiled, but it was not defeated. "You cannot contain me," it growled, and the temperature dropped so sharply that their breaths formed clouds in the air. Frost formed along the walls, and the candles flickered as if struggling to stay alive. The human stepped forward, placing his hand atop the queen's. "Together," he said, "our strength is ours, not yours. You will not divide us." In that moment the air seemed to crack, and the shadows shrieked, a sound that tore through the castle like wind through shattered glass. Light erupted from the pool, blinding, pure, and warm. The queen and the human felt the power course through them, not as individuals but as one. Memories, laughter, fear, longing, all of it merged into a force that neither the shadow nor the darkness could overcome. The shadow screamed, a final, echoing wail, and then it was gone, banished into the void from which it had emerged. Silence fell upon the chamber, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. The storm outside had passed, leaving a quiet that felt almost sacred. The queen lowered her dagger, her body tense but triumphant. The human released a breath he had not realized he had been holding, feeling the exhaustion of the battle and the exhilaration of survival. He turned to her, and for the first time she allowed herself to see not just the warrior beside her but the man, the boy she had once laughed at, now grown into someone she could no longer deny. "You fought well," she said, her voice softer than it had been in centuries. "More than well, you endured, and you trusted even when it would have been easier not to." He smiled faintly, a shadow of the boyish grin from long ago. "You taught me," he said, "even if you did not know it. Courage comes from understanding, from standing in the face of fear and not turning away." The queen studied him, her gaze lingering longer than propriety or caution allowed. "And now," she said, "we face a choice. You could leave, return to your world. You could walk away from the danger, from the threads that have bound us." He shook his head. "No," he said firmly, "not after all this. Not after knowing that our fates are tied together. I will stay, not as a human, not as a boy, but as someone who stands beside you." A silence followed, a pause pregnant with meaning. The queen's chest tightened, an emotion she had not felt in centuries pressing against her heart. Vulnerability, longing, and a recognition that the boy she had laughed at had become something far greater than she had imagined. "You have changed me," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper, "in ways I cannot name. I believed immortality would make me immune to connection, to attachment, to love. And yet," she trailed off, letting the words hang in the air as if afraid to give them form. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a tentative touch that carried a weight of history, promise, and unspoken feelings. "Then we will face it together," he said. "Whatever comes next, we do not walk apart. We do not falter." For a long moment they simply stood there, hands touching, eyes meeting, the world outside and within the castle fading to shadows that did not matter. In that moment, the centuries, the curses, the pain, they all seemed to dissolve into the light they had created together. But the castle, ancient and sentient, whispered in its own voice. Somewhere deep beneath the stones, something stirred, not malevolent this time, but curious. The queen felt it, a pulse of energy that spoke of untold potential, of futures yet unwritten. It was as if the castle itself acknowledged the bond between the human and the vampire queen, recognizing that together they were more than they had been apart. The human looked into her eyes and saw not just the queen, but the woman, fearless, proud, yet capable of tenderness. And he realized that the promise made in laughter long ago had not been meaningless. It had waited, patiently, across time and distance, for both of them to grow into the people capable of fulfilling it. The queen drew him closer, her hand sliding over his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw with an intimacy she had not allowed herself to feel in centuries. "Then we shall see," she whispered, "what it means to face eternity together." Outside, the first rays of dawn touched the castle's highest towers, golden light spilling over black stone and silver runes. Shadows receded, but the memory of the darkness lingered, a reminder that challenges would always come. Yet within the chamber, the human and the vampire queen stood united, a bond forged in trust, courage, and a connection that neither time nor magic could sever. The pool at the center of the room reflected their faces, side by side, and for the first time it showed not fear, not struggle, but hope. The prophecy, the curse, the long years of waiting, they had all led to this moment. And though the world would continue to test them, they knew one truth that could not be taken. Together, they could endure anything. The castle sighed around them, a sound like wind through ancient halls, a soft acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged in shadow and light. The human and the vampire queen stepped back from the pool, their fingers still brushing, hearts steady despite the storms that had raged and the darkness that had sought to divide them. And as they moved toward the balcony, looking out over the lands they had saved and the kingdom they had protected, a gentle breeze lifted, carrying the scent of rain, earth, and something eternal. The queen rested her head lightly against his shoulder, a gesture of trust, of acceptance, and of beginnings. The journey had been long, the battles had been many, the shadows still lingered. But in that moment the future felt theirs, not dictated by prophecy, curse, or fate, but chosen, shared, and alive. And somewhere beyond the horizon the world waited, but together they would face it all. And in their hearts both knew. This was only the beginning of an eternity written not in darkness, but in the light of their shared courage and love.